I'm Robert Runte. I'm senior editor at Essential Edits, so we edit everything. But I spent a long time as an SF editor. I've edited 30 SF books, but I do know other genres, so hopefully I won't kill your story for the wrong reason.
I'm Carrie Mumford. I've been a freelance editor off and on for quite a few years now, and I'm also a writer of short stories and fiction, mostly women's fiction and romance.
I'm Celeste Peters. I've been an editor of both fiction and nonfiction since 1973. Most recently, I've been on the editorial team of the Enigma Front anthologies, specifically the first 3 issues, and was a senior editor on the Aurora Award-nominated second volume of that series.
I'm Rhonda Parrish. I am an acquiring editor for World Weaver Press, which is a small press out of Albuquerque. And I've edited 20-some anthologies and a bunch of books, and I do freelance editing as well. Mostly speculative fiction, but some romance as well.
And I'm Candas Jane Dorsey, and I'm not appearing before you with my editorial hat on. In the interests of the fact that there are about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There are 7 of these so far. So we'll try and be even in terms of how you distribute your comments so that the 7th person is getting time rather than being rushed. So 7 into
Should
Well,
be
you
what
probably
six-
won't be reading all of them.
sort of 6 minutes each, all told.
Okay, we don't normally get to the bottom of the pile.
Yeah, well,
but
we'll
we
see.
usually
I
have
mean,
a deeper pile.
Yeah, that's not very many, so I assumed we could. All right, first, it takes a very brave, or should I say, foolish man to bring an axe to Newcastle Island. I looked around to discover an elderly, wrinkled man looking at me. The tip of his tongue slid out through a gap between his brown teeth as he widened his smile. What do you mean? I looked at the axe I held with both hands. I could not see anything wrong with it. Kanaka Pete. He tilted his head and raised an eyebrow, as if that would explain it all. Who is Kanaka Pete? I asked. He slaughtered his family with an axe about 100 years ago. The man reached over and took the axe out of my hand, then slid an appraising left thumb across the blade before making himself comfortable on a wood stump in my campsite. They caught Kanaka Pete on the beach in this island. They found his severed right thumb amid the carnage of his family, so they believed he was guilty. He vowed eternal revenge on them as they lynched him. He's buried over there near the beach. The man waved vaguely over his shoulder toward the beach. I looked over his shoulder and realized the fog was rolling in thickly from the shore. I could barely make out the sign in the path to the beach that stated no camping beyond this point. I glimpsed something white by the signpost. I took a more focused look to see a ghostly white face that evaporated as soon as I looked at it squarely. I raised my hand to point, but the old man continued his story. Since then, Kanaka Pete has haunted this island. People have reported seeing him swinging an axe. Okay.
Who was first up?
Everybody's looking at me.
Your hand went up first.
I found that 2 things were bugging me. One was kind of clunky in terms of the rhythm. So it was sort of this and it was kind of, it was always the sort of the same rhythm. And it got repetitious very quickly for me. So I was finding it hard on my ear. And then the other thing is that instead of having action and showing the story, the person was relating another story. And so it wasn't so much about what was happening now as this other event, which, well, if we're telling that story, why aren't we reading that story? So it just wasn't quite gelling for me. It was not that it was horrible or anything, I couldn't feel it coming together.
For me, I was wondering who was speaking. I was really focused on the old man because there were some really good details, like his brown teeth and his thumb and things like that stuck out to me. But the whole time I was thinking, I want to know who this narrator is. Like, I'm interested in the old man, but I feel like I should be more interested in the narrator.
Yeah, very similar comments to yours. That first line I just loved, about it taking a strange person to bring an axe to this location. But then I was assuming that the narrator was talking about somebody else, and it turned out to be himself that was carrying it. And I got really confused about who was doing this, and as it went along, again, this intervention of a backstory about yet a third character other than the old man who shows up. It just was too much right off the bat of detail I didn't need to know. I needed to know in the moment, well, what's the situation? What's going to propel this forward as into the story? So more action right off the bat. It was good when it got to the point where he sees something, out there in the fog, but it took too long.
I agree. It was a little bit too much exposition, which is why I put up my hand. But I also cheated because I'm sitting beside the reader, so I read ahead. So, I have strong suspicions that the old man was Pete, who is supposed to have killed his family. I hope that that's a red herring, because otherwise it's just a little bit too obvious, unless we are discovering the truth behind his story, in which case get to that quicker if you can, because we don't need, or find a more elegant way to deliver that exposition.
Right. All right. Actually, there were 9 because 2 were stuck in a paper clip. So, I suppose if I hadn't been dying, I wouldn't have been late for work. The black veins had appeared around 2 moons ago, spreading over the skin of my back like the devil's handwriting, and spider-webbing its way out from my spine. This morning I had awoken to find it branched its way down my arms and up the base of my neck. The rot. I tried not to think the name, but the word kept bubbling up inside me. I sat stiffly in an empty tram car while it careened down its rails through the underground tunnels toward the Venki factory. Sweat, which had nothing to do with the heat from the lava simmering in the river below, wept from my pores. Absently, I slipped my fingers under my long hair to run them over the raised lines. Closing my eyes, I reached inside myself for that bright spot deep within my soul, calling to the magic and beckoning it to the surface. Instead of the warm wave of power I was expecting, pain seared through my senses. I gasped and clutched my head, panting in exertion as the transport lurched to a stop in front of the factory. Groggy, dizzy, and desolate, I waited impatiently for the safety barriers to unlock before barreling down forward over the smooth stone floor and into the wide arched entrance of the factory. The ceilings of the massive underground cavern rose into solid darkness over the endless grid of workstations. Standing in the center, filling out the wide cavern with his massive red-scaled body, was the supervisor of the factory.
Nice.
As the reader, I can say that there were about 5 errors of editing on the first page, and that if I were reading it as an editor, I would have thought this person should have at least proofread, and maybe I don't want to work with someone who's not gotten rid of some things that were very simple. So I had to say that though the story was exciting, there were some things that I, as a reader, I came across, and it wasn't easy to convey them to you with my voice.
I really like the first line. It captures your attention, it pulls you in. And I'm going to be super nitpicky because I didn't have anything to put up my hand with, so there's nothing super obvious. So the first line is, if I hadn't been dying, I wouldn't have been late for work. We actually don't know how those things connect by the end of the first page, how dying made them late for work. Also, they absently put their hand, but they didn't really. It's not absently. author really needed that character to reveal this information somehow. So you said they absently did this thing, but it seems actually very deliberate. So it's just little word choice things that would start to maybe start a little checklist in my brain, but I would have kept reading.
Yeah, I loved all of the language around this. The veins that are growing and everything are really spooky and neat, and I love the setup. Then we're in this careening car, going down the tracks toward the factory, and it felt to me like, well, this person is stuck in this vehicle that's out of control. So why are they worried about dying of this malignancy when imminent death is right ahead? So yeah, that was my main concern. Otherwise, there's some beautiful language there, and certainly a lot of action. Yay!
I too loved the initial hook. It was so good, and right away it made me laugh, and it made me want to keep reading. But to your point too, I kept thinking, like, why are you dying, and why, if you're dying, why is it so important to go to work? And I'm sure there's a good answer. It's just I wanted to know it sooner. And on the car or bus or transport, I started wondering, like, if this person's in so much pain, then are there other people around them that would be noticing? Because it sounded like something that would be obvious. So I think I just wanted a bit more, like maybe a bit slower even.
Yeah, I found I kept having to correct my mental image as I was going. So I loved the opening line like everyone did, right? So I could feel there was a lot of work that went into the first piece, and then as we went further down, I felt a little slappier. So like the repetition of the word factory started to annoy me, because everything, first time, well, I got in the factory, okay, he's going to a factory, but it doesn't look like that. Here's what the factory looks like, okay, so I get that mental picture, and then I think there's this creature there, like I kept having to go back and re-edit my picture that I was building, which is a bit frustrating to a reader, I think. So you need to be just a little smoother all the way through. And then, like this word factory over and over, it just annoyed me, because if this is a magical world, is it really factories as we know that might, maybe come up with a different word. But yeah, it had potential, so I would have kept reading a little further.
I would say using the word factory would work for me just fine, because it places me in what the thing does, but maybe say what kind of factory it is, and then you get the greater
But like
picture.
I couldn't, like we had the trolley and but then there's magic, okay, so is that like dragon magic? Like what kind of magical system? Is it a technological world or with the trolley cars in a factory, or is it a magic? And trying to reconcile that was just confusing to me, but maybe I'm slow.
And the rot made me think zombies.
Yeah.
So I had a very dystopian sort of image, and then we had the scaly dude, so yeah.
Just a
I
little
agree.
clarity, but
Even-
there's something there.
Even with the transport, like I think I called it bus, you called it car, you called it trolley. Like there's definitely room to expand and be specific.
And it's a pet peeve of mine that they weren't careening, they were careering. Careen is so often used wrong. Careen is not about pathway, it's about another thing. Look it up. Okay. My home, the place I'd lived, the place I'd loved, the place I'd died, was now a burger emporium. I wasn't fond of that name, but the bustle and speed of it were lively and exciting. Everything had moved slower when I lived there. After a time, I had embraced the change. I liked to wander back and forth near the entryway. It wasn't possible to go outside now, but I could catch drifts of fresh air here sometimes. A vein of blue in the gray marble archway drew me along like a current. People streamed past in blurs of color, but I wanted to travel the whole course of my secret marble river before I paid them any mind. I floated to follow it under the arch where it ended against the dark woods surrounding the door. Breezy air gusted in, and I focused my will into being solid enough that the air could push me like a leaf. I drifted away from the door on the swirling eddies before turning back. A girl entered, with the wind blowing her light brown hair ahead of her in whipping strands. She paused beneath the carved marble arch and shivered inside her beige jacket. It looked too light for the weather, and her short skirt was certainly no help. She smiled and waved at someone behind me. Her arrival reminded me of the many times I had entered these doors, but especially of one windy day. Is that 3? Okay. We didn't get to wind pushing my parasol, which was the next line, so I'll just, okay.
Who was first?
I think,
I think it was you.
yeah. First of all, there were it felt like a lot of tense changes. Maybe reading it would give me a different impression, but listening to it, it was quite confusing coming back and forth. As was this door that gets mentioned over and over again. I'm not sure whether a point of view character is inside the building, going out the door, or outside coming in the door. And then there's just a lot of detail added at this point about what people are wearing and stuff that I'm not sure is a good place to put that detail right up. It slows the getting to the meat of what the problem is, what's going on here in that first page that is the hook. So you've got to, that detail's fine elsewhere in the story, but kind of minimize it as much as you can before the hook is set.
I think I'm going to say a similar thing, but I was hooked by the place I died. I was like, oh.
Yeah,
But then I wanted to know more about those details, like how did the person die? Because I figured out pretty quickly, I think, that the person was a ghost. And once I had that, I needed another hook to drag me through. And when the clothing description started, I was like, that's not the hook I need. Like, I need to know something more substantial about that world, but I was interested in the world, for sure.
So the thing about these panels is ostensibly we're putting up our hand when we would stop reading, but we're not really putting up our hand where we would stop reading, right? We're putting up our hand where the first flag goes off or where we start getting, cautious about it. So I would have kept reading, and I think maybe I had the same problem as you guys. I couldn't actually pin it down, but I love the first line because I love ghosts, so I was like, I'm there. And then I felt my attention just drifting away, and I had to consciously focus back in on what Candace was saying. So it might be just give a different hook, give another hook, give something in there. But I would have kept reading just with a flag and been like, okay, I need to put on blinders, which is not really what you want. You want the reader to sink into the story and not to have to put themselves there.
Yeah, I found myself sort of, and then I'd stop myself because I got that it was a ghost very quickly. And then, in my view, they were violating ghost rules because she was feeling the fresh air. Like, okay, with what is she sensing fresh air? But then I stopped myself because, okay, it's their world. They can set up the rules. Be patient. But I found myself doing that repeatedly. Like, oh, that doesn't, oh, well, it might fit. So it was annoying, but I kept with it because they might explain it. So I like that. Well, I focus myself to be concrete enough to be blown by the wind. Okay, that's another set of rules. Let's see where that takes us. But yeah, there were some cautions there. And the beige jacket. Nobody cares it's beige. Nobody ever got a book and said, I love it. They had this girl in a beige jacket. Right? Don't bother with descriptions you don't need. We got other things to do with our words.
I like beige. But I'm not. I'm just the reader. Ha-ha. All right.
She is, I don't know if you've noticed, but she is also marking them up.
I can't help myself. Listen, I was in the hospital one time, and it was like 4:30 in the morning, and the person next to me was getting prepped for surgery, and some nurse bustled into the, all the curtains were up and said, are you feeling nauseous? And I woke up. I woke up and said, nauseated. And this head came around the curtain. What? I said, nauseated. Nauseous means people want to throw up when they look at you. And the nurse said, oh. So, you know.
And then made a note on your chart.
Recalcitrant,
Requires editing.
nauseous patient, yes. All right. So, yeah, so I can't help it. It's what's keeping me quiet. Okay. The man in Harry's head said, "You only got yourself to blame, you know." Harry answered him back, "It's not my fault." "That's what they all say," said the man in Harry's head. "Go to hell. Meet you there." Harry snorted. He shifted and floored the accelerator in his new car. The 2081 model was not available in manual ride and had to be custom ordered, but Harry knew who to talk to. He didn't get where he was without telling those panty-assed salesmen the score. They'd argued with him. Who wants to drive their own car these days? Harry did. He wanted complete control in his car, and he usually got what he wanted. "It's indecent, positively indecent," Harry muttered under his breath as he deftly steered around the white Ford MW36, which was going way too slow ahead of him. "Hands like an 80-year-old. She's only 15. "Yeah, you gonna tell me that's not your fault, scumbag?" said the man in Harry's head. Harry told him to shut up and swung his gaze sideways. The way Dolly's hair reflected the light back from the kiss of the sun almost stopped his breath. He was glad she had chosen to let it hang free today, rather than tie it back as she usually did. It let him see her face better. But watching her knead her painful swollen fingers cut him to the bone. "Did you forget to bring your medication?" he asked her. Oh no, I have it, but really, Daddy, it doesn't hurt very much."
So it's interesting, and I would have kept reading, but I was turned off by the fact there's a little bit too much dialogue at the front. I don't know if it's literally a man in his head, or if he is like schizophrenia, or if it's just like a metaphorical thing, or if he's talking to himself.
Was I supposed to keep reading onto the second page, or am I supposed to stop at the end of okay? Right, sorry. Okay.
And then there was when it was like getting into the specific details of the car that passed, I was just like, no, because there's nothing wrong with that, and a lot of readers like that. I'm not one of those readers. If I read sci-fi and they start getting into the specifics of how the spaceship, the model thing, like that's not my thing. So that would be perfect for somebody else. But I was like, oh, if we're gonna start getting into that sort of minutia on page 1, this is not gonna be for me. But then that was the only thing, so I was tempted to put my hand back down, but I just left.
I had a trouble with the opening, because if I had the guy in my head and the level of repartee was that low, I would kill myself. I mean, if all I can do is kind of swear at each other, right? It was just, if I have somebody talking to me, it's got to be interesting. And I just found the conversation lame. It's the sort of thing 8-year-old boys yell at each other, right? I mean,
I liked it. I just thought it was a little bit too long for me. I'm
Yeah.
okay with it being like not totally scintillating.
and then
because-
get into cars.
Yeah.
I'm not one of those guys, right? So I resent those guys. But, so that wasn't going to work for me as an editor. It might work for somebody else.
This is why we have 4 panelists. I loved it. Everything on that page spoke to character. And I don't know whether this was the beginning of a book or the beginning of a short story. To me, it didn't matter because I was so engaged in the world and the character that I was more than willing to go on reading. Very good.
I really liked Harry. That was it. He made me laugh, and he was funny. Too many car names for me too. I got sidelined by those, but I loved his snarky personality. I did get a bit confused about the talking in the head, like maybe that needed more space or something. And as soon as it switched to the other car and then the other person who I think was in the same car with him, the young person, I got all confused there. But I would have kept reading because I really liked Harry. Yeah.
Am I allowed to say anything?
We got lots of time.
The internal age of that, if you look at, wasn't it John Clute who talked about the internal age of a piece of writing? The internal age of that piece, though, is very much sort of 1947 or maybe 57. So, and it's set in 2081. But even today, you have a hard time getting a standard car. And I am a car person. So, the car stuff didn't get me, but what got me was, do we think that in another however many years that is, because I'm not a math person, that the cars will not have changed dramatically the same way cars have changed in 10 years? Or
I understood though that that it was about, maybe I read a different story, heard a different story. I thought it was everybody else's car was self-driving, and they have elected to drive a drive car. that
yeah,
they had
but I
hunted
mean,
this down,
that could
right?
be in 5
20
years.
yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
this is 2081.
Retro,
Yeah.
you know?
So just if I were the editor, I would have kept reading, but I would have asked the author to think about whether that date was a good date for what they were describing. Would it be better for that date to be in 15 years rather than in however many?
60s-ish.
Yeah. All right. My dad catches me as I'm sneaking past the garage. Hey, where are you going with that bike? I decide to go with a half-truth. Just across the street for a little ride. It's your brother's. You know you're not supposed to touch it. Besides, you don't even know how to ride. Yes, I do. I learned how. Wishful thinking. I'd been secretly falling in the dirt for days. Really? You learned to ride a bike? Prove it. He follows me across the street to a dusty vacant lot where bigger kids pound their one-speeds across a bumpy track embedded with purple thistles and gopher holes. Heart hammering, I hold my breath, perch my little bum on the hard seat, and push off. There's the familiar wobbling before the fall, and then, to my utter amazement, I'm riding jubilant circles around my equally astonished father. It's a 1-minute performance, but I can almost hear the angels sing. The next day, there's a blue second-hand bike propped against the garage wall. A girl's bicycle, with plastic tasseled handlebar grips and a dropped crossbar. I'm astonished. I've astonished my father into positive action, perhaps for the very first time, and life has suddenly expanded. And that, in a nutshell, is the heroine of this book. I'm 6 years old, pushing at boundaries and grasping for early emancipation. I'd rather risk trouble than play it safe. If anything's worth learning, I'll secretly teach myself. And someone from my gene pool must have bequeathed me their wanderer's heart, or maybe their wandering heart. To wit, I can't wait to get away on my own steam.
I was there. I mean, I loved that it was present tense because it's a kid and kids are very immediate. And present tense is love or hate, and some editors will like stop as soon as it's present tense. But I loved it. Then I think it was like astonished twice in the same sentence.
I think you put your hand up.
Oh, I did,
Right here.
absolutely.
I just read it twice because I
Oh,
made a
okay.
mistake. I've astonished my father into
Okay.
positive action.
And then when the character switched to, and now I'm going to tell you that it's me,
Yeah.
and I'm
Yeah.
writing a book, then I was like, oh. And I was totally fully engaged until that point, and then I was just like not.
Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, I was fully engaged until the 6-year-old started talking like a PhD student, you know, about gene pools and whatnot. Maybe not PhD student, but far advanced beyond a 6-year-old's perspective.
At the same point, yeah.
Likewise, to be so self-aware as to know that they themselves have brought forth this positive action in their father. It just didn't ring true to me the way a 6-year-old would think. So that's what took me out.
Same for me. I was like you. I was totally there. I could see it all happening. I loved the language. It was beautiful. But then something started to tweak where I was like, wait a minute. Is this what is the point of view? Like, am I with the 6-year-old? Because it was in present tense, so it felt like I was supposed to be. But then they sounded like the most articulate 6-year-old there ever was. And then when the summary started, like the, hey, now I'm going to tell you this story, I was like, oh no, don't do that. Just cut that part and start at chapter 1, you know? But yeah, the writing was beautiful.
The opening, we all agree, is fabulous, but why would you stop that and then have her talk about herself? Never
I don't answer that.
show, never talk. Yeah.
It's a memoir.
Yeah, it says at the top a memoir, but I'm not reading the titles or the chapter
Okay.
1 or whatever, right?
But
even
as
so.
memoir, I just, yeah, you can frame it, but yeah, that
But I-
failed as a frame.
But I also know the answer to that question, and it's, I'm afraid I'm not going to get this across to you with my immediate discussion, so I better back off and frame it.
But it's insulting to the audience. Don't assume your audience are idiots. A percentage, perhaps, but
All right, good, excellent point. In a world where being born into the middle class was practically a crime and being under the radar an actual and unforgivable act of treason, there were still some out there who'd pay for a little privacy. A lot. Riker here, for instance, he'd chosen the Geordie LaForge package not because he was blind, far from it, but because he was a Trekkie and a criminal in the eyes of Cybro. His 3-part black market ident wash was out of bounds of fierce. The amount of creds he was paying would keep her supplied for a year, plus a few choice extras. Trino positioned her index finger on the spine of the scalpel and paused. Siri, play Retro Playlist Volume 3. She drew in a deep, satisfying breath as the opening sequence of Led Zeppelin's Kashmir seeped into her skin and pulsed through her blood. She'd been born in the wrong era. The 80s, 90s, early 20th, those were the days. Her favorite shows, music, all of it. She'd even named her at-home comm system Siri after a long-defunct personal... Oh, I see. We're at unanimity and we're only down here. Okay.
I put up my hand because Siri, I was like, this is in the future. Sure. I mean, I can't get my phone to work for more than 5 years. I mean, but then I guess she'd renamed it. So maybe if I don't know. It seemed, I'm still waiting for the conflict, the tension, the reason that I'm good, like the actual hook. So yeah, I feel a little bit bad that I put up my hand for Siri and then I find out that she was like, renamed something that she wasn't talking into an iPhone 100 years in the future, but
Yeah, for me, it was a lot of names coming at me really fast here without context in particular, and some ambiguity. I mean, it talks about people wanting, are willing to pay for, or not pay for, there was a term there very early on. It's something that people wanted, and I wasn't sure if it
Would pay for a little privacy?
pay for. Did they actually say pay
Yeah.
for a little privacy?
Yeah.
But then what's the next sentence?
There were still some out there who'd pay for a little privacy. A lot.
Okay, a lot of money, or did they want a lot of privacy?
or a lot of people do it.
Or a lot of
Yeah.
people, yeah. The ambiguity there was the first thing that kind of popped me out just a little bit out of the story. So you've got to be careful about those little details as well.
I think I got confused after the a lot. I think it would have been a lot different to read it on the page because my brain got stuck on the pay for what, and then I was like, what is a lot? And then I was trying to figure that out, and the story kept going, and then I came back in around Siri, and I was like, wait, what is happening? So there was a lot of names, a lot of action, but not a lot of things to make me engage with it, which is really hard to do on one page, but yeah, I just got totally confused.
I just found that nothing was happening. I found that the person was just giving us exposition on the world. So I had, and you think the 80s and 90s were the best, who cares? Like, nothing's happening. You turned on your stereo. Not super exciting for me, maybe for you. So there was no hook for me. It was just this endless description of a Trekkie who, again, is that even going to be a thing? I mean, please not forever. There must be some others. I love Star Trek, but at some point,
it's a very long sentence as well. And I am the queen of run-on sentences. It's just a very long first introduction to your story.
I hate to break it to you, those were all sentence fragments with periods in between them.
Oh, I see. Okay.
I think what's interesting, like the live action Slush is not as tolerant of the beginnings of novels. And I have a suspicion, although it says nothing on here to indicate it, that this might be the beginning of a novel. But if it's the beginning of a short story, then you have to really hustle it, because I have the privilege of knowing what happens at the bottom of the page. And the last sentence of the page starts with or includes her mind drifting back to that fateful day long ago. So,
I want to start with the
Show
day
us the
long ago.
fateful
Like,
day.
why are we, it shows me the person doesn't know where the story starts. I don't care about the music. Tell me about fateful day.
Sounds like it starts on the next page.
And that happens all the time, that people don't know where the story starts.
Yeah.
And, I mean, I have to write myself into my own books. The first 2 chapters usually go, because I'm still trying to find the beginning. But you gotta find that before you submit it.
Yep.
one time I had a workshop in class, and people were sending a chapter of their novel. And everyone workshopped this chapter, including me, and said, this is a great beginning. And then we all looked at it in the actual workshop after we'd read it like 3 times each. And at the top of the page, it said chapter 26. Okay. Great, she's not here. I do another lap in the bus station, then head outside to search the sidewalks. So many tourists wave selfie sticks in the air to take pictures of themselves with the Rocky Mountains. Others flag down taxis, but no Aunt Steph. Can my life get any worse? I lean my backpack and suitcase against a wall and punch in Mom's cell number. She's not here, I say. What do you mean? Mom's voice escalates with each word. Calm down, I just said she's not here. I've waited for 20 minutes. Are you sure? Of course I'm sure. I roll my eyes. Why would I lie? I knew this trip was a bad idea. Mom, this trip was your idea. Listen, you stay put, she barks. I'll make a few calls. Relax, I'm 14, remember? Besides, this is Banff, Alberta, not New York City. Hell, what kind of trouble? Julian Meyer, language, Mom snaps. I hold my breath to stop the words from spewing out. No point digging a deeper hole than I'm already in. I'll walk to Oma's, I say. Aunt Steph will figure it out. But your grandparents are away on holidays. I know, but there's a spare key in the garden. I press against the wall to let a family with a ton of luggage pass by. Aunt Steph will go there when she remembers she forgot me. She did not forget you. She must have had an emergency.
I'll go first. I would have kept reading. Like, it was a clear escalating problem. And I liked the narrator's voice, and I liked that it was very clear her age, and I could see how there would be more problems. Like, if her grandparents are at home, her aunt hasn't shown up, I'm wondering, like, what happened to her aunt? It's clearly not something as simple as she forgot. So I was hooked. I would have kept going for sure.
Yeah, I liked it too. I liked it a lot. It was set up, a lot of information was there, but it also at the same time bothered me that conveniently they just I'm 14, because you know my kids never say that, right? They would say I'm an adult now, right? But they wouldn't say. But it's picky. I would stay with the story, see where it was going.
Yeah, it's really tricky to embed lots of information in dialogue, and I found I wasn't rolling my eyes because I thought, yeah, they could have said those things,
Just
even
all
though
of
it's
them
full
at
of
once? Yeah.
well, yeah,
It's a bit, but I went with it.
yeah.
Yeah, I thought it rolled along quite well. And thank you for putting it in Banff. I always love reading stuff that's set in a setting that I actually have some relationship to, and makes the story all that much more interesting for me, at least. And I thought the dynamic between the mother and daughter, I guess at this point I'm not quite sure whether it's a female. I assumed it was. Was believable, and there was the mystery set up. And, that's a lot to get done in a first page, so it was good.
I did like the voice. I thought it was very teenage. I wasn't sure if it was a boy or a girl. I was imagining girl, but then the name I think sounded like a boy. It was like Julian.
It's
or something.
Jillian.
Oh, Jillian. Okay, so probably a girl.
Jillian was.
I started to be like, when they said, I'm 14, and I was like, And then, this is Banff, Alberta. I was like, oh, no. No, because you're not going to say that.
Yeah.
You're going to say, this is Banff. Or if you're saying this is Banff, Alberta, it's because you think you're writing for an American audience and they have no idea where Banff is. So just, you know, you've established it's in the Rockies, give us one of those things. This is like, it's a small town, or this, I mean, whatever. And then unfold the actual setting over time, but don't just like, I'm 14, this is Banff, Alberta, and I'm talking to my mom, instead of actually just going to my omas. My daughter is an exception. She would probably call me. But I think most teenagers would just be like, oh, she forgot me, I'm going to my grandmother's. I didn't need to be given step by step but your grandparents aren't there. Oh, I know, but there's a key and the thing. I was just, it was a little
So you
bit
wanted her
too.
to go and then call her mom.
It was just, or just go and get out the key and go in and find out whatever is wrong at the house, because there's gonna be something wrong at the house, right? So I didn't need all of the procedural steps in between explained, because then I'm gonna watch them unfold. So I don't need both.
So the print is quite large in this one, so I'm actually going to read more than a single page, because it's really large spacing, so it doesn't have as many words. The children in this story do not want to be named, so we will call them by their pseudonym names. The little girl will be called Bronwyn, and the boy will be called Ronan. It was just an ordinary day in Edmonton. It was just an ordinary afternoon in Edmonton, Alberta. The kids were on a late afternoon school outing to the library. Ronan loved the library, not because of the books, but because there were great places to hide in there. Ronan and his sister found such a place. It was so good that they did not hear the class leaving, and they had lost all track of time. All the other kids in the school group had left with the teachers, and now the doors were locked and the lights were out. For some reason, they were not so scared, and the outside light was coming in through a small window and shone down the main aisle. Just then, there was a swooshing noise.
Oh, that's 30.
Okay.
Edmonton, Alberta. And I felt like this is a summary of a story that's being told to me. I'm not seeing it. It's not being shown to me. They're just, this happened, and then this happened, and this happened, and this is how they felt about it. And it's just not enough for me.
Yeah, it's called an outline. I don't want to pay to read your outline. I want the actual story. And even the opening line was a bit, here, we're going to use the pseudonym. Yeah, okay, just use the pseudonym. Don't, like it seemed like it was going to be a hook, but then it didn't do anything with it. It just, yeah, it was all, everything was set up, but we didn't see anything happening. So, yeah, too much exposition.
On the opening line, I was willing to keep going because I was like, this is going to be different. Like, it seemed like a hook. I thought, oh, this story is going to have a strong narrator who's going to tell me. I think Neil Gaiman's Stardust was a bit like that really strong narrator who's part of the story. But then as soon as it continued on, just explaining what these kids did, I was like, no, I want to be with those kids in the moment, not just hearing about what those kids are doing.
And whenever you find yourself, for some reason, they weren't afraid of the light. As soon as you're telling me for some reason, yeah, that's really suspicious. Like even you as the author recognize that's not believable, you know? Yeah,
the first sentence about the pseudonyms, I thought, this is a note to the author. Why is it here? But I was willing to go with it because I didn't know where it was going from there. And then we go into this story. This sounded very much like it was meant for a young audience. And I'm thinking, okay, is a young audience going to want to be hit with this name pseudonyms? Or in the very first sentence, will they know what that is? It just seemed to be a disjoint there. And yeah, it just wasn't going anywhere for me either. Sorry.
And if it is for a young audience, kids are the toughest critics, and you need to hook them immediately, or else there will be a shiny thing over there, and you will have lost them forever.
I have to commend the author for not putting the apostrophe in the possessive it's. You have no idea how annoying it is to see that over and over again, including from many good writers who know better. And I know a New York editor was on a panel like this at one point, and he said, if I see the apostrophe and the possessive its in the first 100 pages, I reject the manuscript no matter what, because I know that that author is not professional enough to work with. And I'm like, whoa, you harsh.
Especially before autocorrect, right? Because autocorrect gets me in trouble all the time.
Well, I mean, even when you use the grammar functions and so on, and Grammarly and so on, you have to look at what they suggest and make sure it's right.
Well, mine's always on my phone. It's not when I'm writing the book. Is that all of the stories that we have right now?
It is. It is all of the stories.
We have 5 minutes.
You have 5 minutes, and so first of all, was there anyone in the audience who didn't get their well, then you'd be identified, wouldn't you? Everyone closed their eyes, like in a game of thing. And if anyone didn't get their page in, seriously, put your hand up. No, nobody closed their eyes, so okay.
Are there any
No
questions?
compliance. So, well, we have about 5 minutes. So you could also,
Oh, so brave.
whoa, and self-identify. Whoa, that is brave.
It's harder for us to be mean, though, if we know who we are.
Is this page 1?
Yes.
Okay.
Please read the first number at the top.
Okay, yes. 1950. Why do we hardly ever see any dead birds on the farm? Jenny asked her father through a mouthful of mashed potatoes. Don't talk with your mouth full, he said. Yeah, but why don't we? Why don't we what? Jenny rolled her eyes and tried again. Where are all the dead birds? What are you talking about? What dead birds? You're a moron, declared her brother, earning him the look from his parent. Jim's silent reprimand was automatic. His mind was focused on the question of whether or not Charlie would be able to pay him the cash he owed in time for the seed order to go in. Jenny was persistent. There are a powerful lot of birds flying around, aren't there? Jim forced himself back to the present and allowed that there were. Then why do we hardly ever see a dead bird? They must get sick and die. You'd think we'd find more of them on the ground. Well, smarty pants, her brother Beanie sneered. Predators. Okay. But what, do they swallow the whole bird, spit out the feathers? And attacks from bigger birds, you'd think there would be smaller ones knocked out of the sky or something. And like I said, the sick ones, or even old age, they can't all disappear when they die. She batted her long blonde hair back over her shoulder and settled back in her chair, certain she'd made a valid argument. Jim sighed. Yes, honey, I guess maybe so. I just dunno. One of those things, I guess.
I kind of liked it.
Because?
I like the dialogue. I like the interactions between the people. They might have, nitpicked here and there that take out a fact that the seed thing was a bit distracting. But I liked the conversation. I liked her persistence, the characterization that came through that. We got where the location is. There a lot of the family dynamic. There was a lot of stuff in there. It painted a really clear picture for me, and it was entertaining, and I liked the character.
I love the question. I mean, certainly, I think all of us at one point in life have wondered where all the dead birds are.
And it's not now.
Where I was getting confused a few times is in shifts in point of view. Now, it's okay to have the omniscient point of view, but usually you don't change things so quickly within such a small, piece of prose. And so I was thinking, if this is the father's, if this is Jim's point of view, then we should start out with him making some observation about his daughter fidgeting or something before she comes out with her first question there, just to kind of get us in his mind. But if it's not, well, it's not, okay. But
It has to be omniscient because there's actually quite a span of years. That's why the 1950s is important.
You're an anonymous person in the audience. Everybody else?
yeah.
I really like the opening. I also had questions about who is our point of view character and this, which is really fast. But now I'm actually very concerned about the birds, actually. So
Yeah,
Hopefully
yeah,
it's
that
something.
overrode things.
I think I liked it a lot too, and I'm definitely wondering about the birds. But I did notice something super nitpicky, but you might be able to shorten a little bit. Like for example, with the potato, she said, when I thought it was in the little girl's perspective, she said my mouth was full of potatoes, and then her dad said, don't talk with your mouth full. Like you might be able to get away with just one or the other because you're just repeating something the author already, or the reader already knows, but I was definitely intrigued.
I liked knowing that it was potatoes in her mouth because that's a very
Yeah.
specific image.
Yeah,
It's true.
and very fun.
I was annoyed by the shift in viewpoint, but I assumed that was because you were reading it and I had missed something, right? So, yeah, omniscient almost never works. It's so much easier to write in one viewpoint and stick in that viewpoint. It's just
Even if the viewpoint changes from scene to scene.
scene
Yeah,
to scene, chapter to chapter, but mixing it within a page, that I've never
Okay.
read a book I like.
I'd like 2 minutes to either make a last comment or ask a quick question.
I think we have time.
Yeah, we've run out.
Hmm?
I think we're at
We
time.
have time.
Yeah. Yeah,
We do have to.
2 minutes. Because it's like 1:50, so we can push that on.
Okay, how about this? Real quick, tell everybody where they can find your books and recommend a book by somebody that's not in the room.
Oh, jeez.
You go.
Oh, okay. You can find my books everywhere there are books, except, bookstores. Like anywhere. Anywhere on the internet, just search my name or my website. And I would say read Stardust, because I mentioned that. If you haven't already read Neil Gaiman's Stardust, it's awesome, and it has a narrator that might be helpful. That's it.
Yeah, my books are all on Amazon. And, if you want to go to my website, it has links to all of them. And for a really good, a trilogy that I'm just finishing reading, Cixin Liu's Three Body Problem, won the Hugo Award a few years ago. And if you like really solid sci-fi, it's amazing.
Nice. My books are available online and in libraries, and here specifically, they are at the Myth Hawker table and Taiki Books. And we're specifically launching Earth, Giants, Golems, and Gargoyles this weekend. And a book by somebody who's not in the room that I would recommend is Shard and Stone, if you like epic fantasy. It's by Laura Van Arendonk-Baugh, and I think there are probably copies at the shared author table, the IFWA table. There are. Okay.
Okay, my books are maybe at the shared author table, depending on whether I get my rear end gear and put them there, or at the autograph session. And a book by someone who's not in the room. Well, the most recent tremendous book I read was called The Clay Girl, and I've now forgotten the author's name because I do that. But it was just published by ECW Press, and it's an absolutely astonishing book with a wonderful child point of view, and the child is going through terrible things but processing them in a very beautiful way, and the language is wonderful. And haven't read a book about that kind of subject that is as good since Susan Palwick's Flying in Place.
I don't have a book. I have business cards.